Samantha Williams sits in stunned silence as security escorts her from first-class seat 2A. The white businessman who demanded her removal smirks triumphantly. What he doesn't know is that in 5 minutes, the pilot will announce their new destination, owner. The same woman he just humiliated now controls his fate completely. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and transformation, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories of resilience and triumph. This tale will show you how one moment of discrimination led to the most satisfying reversal of fortune you've ever witnessed. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Samantha Williams never imagined her biggest business triumph would begin with such humiliation. At 42, she had built Meridian Industries from nothing into a Fortune 500 consulting powerhouse, but her journey started in the grittiest corners of Detroit's inner city. Growing up in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, Samantha watched her mother, Diana, work 3 jobs just to keep food on their table. Diana cleaned office buildings at night, stocked shelves at dawn, and served lunch at a diner during the day. Despite crushing exhaustion, she made one thing crystal clear to her daughter. "Education is your ticket out, baby girl," Diana would whisper during their nightly reading sessions. "Nobody can take your mind away from you." Those words became Samantha's anthem through years of academic excellence, despite attending underfunded schools. While classmates struggled with outdated textbooks, she devoured every book in the local library. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, recognized something special and helped her navigate scholarship applications to prestigious universities. Harvard Business School became her proving ground, but not without battles. Professors questioned her preparation. Classmates assumed she was an affirmative action admission. Study groups formed without her. She responded by outworking everyone, often staying in the library until security locked the doors. "They expect you to fail," she told herself during lonely midnight study sessions. Prove them wrong. After graduation, Samantha joined a boutique consulting firm where she quickly discovered that her Harvard MBA couldn't shield her from corporate racism. Clients requested different representatives. Colleagues took credit for her ideas. Partners passed her over for promotions while promoting less qualified white men. The breaking point came during a merger presentation where the client CEO told her to fetch coffee, assuming she was an assistant despite her leading the entire project. That night, Samantha made a life-changing decision. She would build her own empire. Meridian Industries started in her studio apartment with a borrowed laptop and fierce determination. She specialized in helping struggling companies restructure operations, drawing from her intimate understanding of overcoming impossible odds. Her first client was a failing family restaurant whose owner reminded her of her mother. Word spread about the brilliant consultant who could save any business. Within 5 years, Fortune 500 companies competed for her services. Within 10 years, she employed 200 people. Within 15 years, she commanded respect in boardrooms across America. But respect didn't eliminate prejudice. It just made the racism more sophisticated. Today's flight to Chicago represented her greatest achievement yet. After months of complex negotiations, Meridian was acquiring Pinnacle Airlines, a struggling carrier with routes across the Midwest. The purchase price of $800 million would make headlines, but more importantly, it would make her one of the few Black women to own a major airline. Samantha boarded Flight 447 at Detroit Metropolitan Airport feeling invincible. Her tailored Navy Armani suit projected quiet confidence. Her Italian leather briefcase contained contracts that would change aviation history. She presented her first-class ticket to the gate agent with a smile. "Have a wonderful flight, Ms. Williams," the agent said warmly. Settling into seat 2A, Samantha opened her laptop to review final acquisition documents. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was flying on the very airline she would own in a few hours. She had specifically chosen this flight to experience Pinnacle's service firsthand before taking control. The cabin filled with typical first-class passengers, business executives, wealthy retirees, and frequent flyers. Samantha noticed a few curious glances, but attributed them to professional recognition. Forbes had featured her on their cover last month as the turnaround queen. She was wrong about the nature of those stares. As passengers continued boarding, Samantha felt the familiar weight of being the only black face in first class. It was a feeling she'd never quite gotten used to, despite her success. The whispered conversations and sideways glances created an undercurrent of tension she chose to ignore. This was supposed to be her victory lap, not another battleground. Richard Blackstone noticed Samantha the moment he boarded. A 55-year-old investment banker from old Connecticut money, Blackstone had inherited his wealth, his prejudices, and his sense of entitlement in equal measure. To him, first class represented a natural hierarchy that certain people simply didn't belong in. "Excuse me," he said to flight attendant Jessica Chen, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "There seems to be some mistake with the seating arrangements." Jessica, a 28-year-old who had worked for Pinnacle Airlines for 3 years, looked up from her pre-flight checklist. "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Blackstone?" "That woman in 2A, he said, nodding toward Samantha. "I don't think she belongs in first class. Are you sure her ticket wasn't upgraded by mistake?" Jessica glanced at Samantha, who was quietly working on her laptop, then back at Blackstone. "Sir, I'd be happy to check, but all passengers have been properly screened. At boarding, I'm a Platinum Elite member," Blackstone continued, his voice rising slightly. "I've been flying with this airline for 12 years. I think I know who typically occupies these seats." The coded language wasn't lost on Jessica, but airline policy required her to verify complaints professionally. She approached Samantha with an apologetic smile. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you, but could you please show me your boarding pass?" Samantha looked up from her laptop, immediately recognizing the familiar dance of discrimination. She had faced this routine dozens of times in restaurants, hotels, and exclusive venues. Her calm exterior masked the familiar sting of being singled out. "Of course," she said smoothly, producing her boarding pass and driver's license. "Is there a problem?" Jessica examined the documents carefully. The ticket was legitimate, paid for in full, with no upgrades or special considerations. Samantha Williams was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Everything appears to be in order," Jessica told Blackstone when she returned. "Ms. Williams has a valid first-class ticket." But Blackstone wasn't satisfied. His complaint had attracted attention from other passengers, and he sensed an opportunity to assert his perceived social dominance. "I find that hard to believe," he said loudly enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "People like her don't usually travel in first class unless there's been some kind of error or charity upgrade." The racist undertone was unmistakable now. Conversation stopped. Passengers turned to watch the developing confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, others nodded in agreement with Blackstone's implications. Samantha felt every eye in the cabin, focused on her. This was the moment she dreaded most about her success. Despite her achievements, her net worth, her influence, she was still reduced to the color of her skin in situations like this. "Sir, I need to ask you to return to your seat," Jessica said, her voice strained. "All passengers have valid tickets." "I want to speak to your supervisor," Blackstone demanded. "I'm not comfortable with this situation, and frankly, neither are other passengers." He gestured around the cabin and several white passengers nodded their support. Margaret Stevens, a retired schoolteacher from suburban Detroit, whispered, "To her husband, he does have a point. She doesn't look like she belongs here." The mob mentality was forming exactly as Samantha had witnessed throughout her career. Individual prejudice became collective discrimination when people felt empowered by numbers. "I understand your concern, Mr. Blackstone," Jessica said reluctantly. "Let me get my supervisor." Samantha watched this familiar theater unfold with a mixture of rage and resignation. She could fight back, cause a scene, demand justice. But experience had taught her that black women who fought too hard were labeled aggressive, angry, or difficult. The consequences could follow her for years. Instead, she maintained her dignity while documenting everything on her phone. Every face, every word, every discriminatory action would be remembered. She had learned long ago that patience and preparation were more powerful than immediate confrontation. What none of them knew was that their victim was about to become their boss. Supervisor Patricia Wells arrived with the confident stride of someone who had handled countless passenger complaints. At 48, Wells prided herself on maintaining order and keeping customers satisfied, especially high-value frequent flyers, like Blackstone. "What seems to be the issue here?" Wells asked, her tone suggesting she had already decided how this would end. "This passenger," Blackstone said, pointing at Samantha like she was an object rather than a person, "clearly doesn't belong in first class. I suspect there's been an error with her ticketing, and I think other passengers agree with me." Wells glanced at the nodding faces around the cabin, then at Samantha, who sat with quiet dignity despite the humiliating spectacle. The supervisor's decision calculus was simple: one questionable passenger versus multiple complaining customers. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your identification and boarding pass again," Wells said to Samantha. "I already showed them to your flight attendant," Samantha replied evenly. "Everything is in order." "I understand, but I need to verify personally." Samantha handed over her documents again, watching Wells examine them with exaggerated scrutiny. She knew what was coming next. The supervisor would find some technicality, some excuse to remove her and appease the complaining passengers. Security Officer Marcus Johnson appeared at Wells's beckoning. As a 35-year-old black man working for airport security, Marcus immediately understood the dynamics at play. He had seen this scenario too many times before. "Marcus, we have a seating dispute that needs resolution," Wells said. "This passenger may need to be relocated." Marcus looked at Samantha's documentation, his jaw tightening as he recognized the injustice unfolding. Her ticket was perfect. Her identification matched. She had every right to that seat. "Ma'am, these documents look valid to me," Marcus said quietly to Wells. "I understand your assessment, but we have multiple passenger complaints about comfort and appropriate seating arrangements," Wells replied, using corporate speak to mask discrimination. The coded language was clear to everyone involved. This wasn't about tickets or policies. This was about race, class, and the assumption that successful black women didn't belong in spaces of privilege. Samantha felt the familiar weight of representing her entire race in this moment. Every eye was watching to see how the angry black woman would respond. Would she cause a scene? Would she prove their stereotypes right? Instead, she made a calculated decision. "I'll move," she said quietly, gathering her belongings. The cabin erupted in a mixture of satisfied murmurs and uncomfortable silence. Blackstone smiled triumphantly as he claimed her seat, spreading his belongings across the extra space like a conquering general. Marcus escorted Samantha to economy seat 23F, his apologetic expression conveying what he couldn't say aloud. "I'm sorry," he whispered as she settled into the cramped middle seat between a crying infant and an overweight businessman. The walk of shame felt endless. Every passenger she passed seemed to stare, some with sympathy, others with satisfaction that the natural order had been restored. Samantha held her head high, but inside she burned with familiar fury. This was why she had built her empire. This was why success mattered, not for the money or recognition, but for moments like this, when dignity was stripped away simply because of skin color. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Samantha pulled out her phone and began documenting everything. Names, faces, badge numbers, exact quotes. She had learned long ago that justice required evidence, and evidence required meticulous preparation. Comment number 1 if you think Samantha should have fought back harder in this moment, and hit that like button if you believe no one should ever face this kind of discrimination. Subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption, because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. But here's what I need to know. What would you have done in Samantha's position? Would you have caused a scene or maintained dignity, like she did? Let me know in the comments below, and get ready for the most satisfying plot twist you've ever witnessed. While Blackstone celebrated his victory in first class, Samantha's phone buzzed with urgent messages from her legal team. Her assistant, Monica, had sent the final acquisition contracts along with a timeline for the day's events. All documents signed and ready for your arrival, the message read. Media conference scheduled for 3 p.m. at O'Hare. Pinnacle's board is excited to meet their new owner. The irony hit Samantha like a physical blow. She was sitting in economy class on the very airline she was about to purchase for $800 million. The same company that had just humiliated her would soon call her boss. Her phone contained emails from the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and CNN requesting interviews about the historic acquisition. First black woman to own major airline would be tomorrow's headline, but today she was just another passenger deemed unworthy of first class. Samantha scrolled through her contacts until she found her lawyer, David Chen. A quick text explained the situation in coded language that wouldn't raise suspicions if overheard. Experiencing in-flight service issues with target company. Documenting for potential legal action. Proceed with acquisition as planned. David's response was immediate. Document everything. This could strengthen our position significantly. The legal implications were staggering. Pinnacle Airlines had just discriminated against their incoming owner in the most public way possible. The story would write itself, and the consequences would be severe. But Samantha wasn't interested in simple revenge. She saw an opportunity for transformation. Growing up in Detroit, her mother had taught her that every setback contained the seeds of a greater comeback. "Turn your pain into power, baby girl," Diana would say during their toughest times. "Let them underestimate you, then show them who you really are." This humiliation would become the foundation of systemic change. Samantha began crafting her response strategy. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the impact would be lost. Too late, and the moment would pass. She needed maximum shock value combined with undeniable moral authority. Her laptop contained detailed files on every Pinnacle Airlines employee, including Supervisor Patricia Wells and her disciplinary history. Wells had 3 previous complaints about inappropriate passenger treatment, all involving minorities. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. Flight attendant Jessica Chen's record was different. She was newer, less experienced, and her previous evaluations showed genuine commitment to customer service. She had made a mistake under pressure, but her overall record suggested someone who could learn and grow. Blackstone was a different story entirely. Samantha's research team had compiled extensive background information on all major Pinnacle customers. Richard Blackstone III was a trust fund baby who had inherited his investment firm from his father. His social media posts revealed a pattern of entitled behavior and barely concealed prejudice. His company, Blackstone & Associates, managed portfolios for several clients who valued diversity and inclusion. They would be very interested to learn about their representatives' public discrimination against a prominent black CEO. The young boy across the aisle kept staring at Samantha with recognition in his eyes. Finally, he whispered to his mother, "That's the lady from the magazine, the one who helps businesses." His mother, a tired-looking black woman named Angela, glanced over and gasped. She had read about Samantha in Essence magazine just last month. The article highlighted successful black women in corporate America. "Are you?" Angela began hesitantly, then stopped herself. She had witnessed the humiliation in first class and couldn't believe someone would treat such an accomplished woman so poorly. Samantha smiled warmly at the family. "I'm Samantha Williams." "What's your name, young man?" "Marcus," the boy said proudly. "I want to own a business like you someday." "Then you will," Samantha assured him. "Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong somewhere. Promise me that." The boy nodded solemnly, and his mother wiped away tears. This was why Samantha's success mattered beyond personal achievement. She represented possibility for an entire generation of children who needed to see themselves reflected in positions of power. As the plane reached cruising altitude, word began spreading through economy class about the prominent CEO who had been removed from first class. Passengers whispered in amazement and growing anger about the injustice they had witnessed. Margaret Stevens, the retired teacher who had supported Blackstone's complaint, overheard the conversations and began researching Samantha on her phone. Her face grew pale as she discovered exactly who they had humiliated. The mood in economy grew increasingly supportive of Samantha, while first class remained blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. Blackstone continued regaling nearby passengers with stories of his business acumen, completely oblivious to the identity of the woman he had displaced. Samantha used the flight time to finalize her response strategy. This wouldn't just be about personal vindication. She would use this moment to implement sweeping changes in airline industry practices, creating policies that would protect future passengers from similar discrimination. The acquisition would proceed as planned, but the announcement would carry additional weight. Pinnacle Airlines wouldn't just have a new owner. They would have a new mission. Justice was coming, and it would arrive right on schedule. Margaret Stevens couldn't stop staring at her phone screen. The Wikipedia page for Samantha Williams read like a corporate fairy tale. Harvard MBA, Fortune 500 CEO, net worth exceeding $500 million. The same woman she had dismissed as unworthy of first class was featured on the covers of Businessweek, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review. "Henry," she whispered urgently to her husband, showing him her phone. "Do you know who that woman is? The one they moved to economy?" Henry Stevens adjusted his reading glasses and studied the screen. His face went ashen as he recognized the implications. They had just witnessed the public humiliation of one of America's most successful businesswomen. "Good Lord," he muttered. "This is going to be a disaster for the airline." Word spread through economy class like wildfire. Passengers discreetly searched for information about their fellow traveler, each discovery adding to the growing sense of outrage. The woman cramped into seat 23F wasn't just any passenger. She was a corporate titan who had overcome impossible odds to reach the pinnacle of American business. Angela, the young mother sitting with her son Marcus, felt a mixture of pride and fury. Here was the kind of successful black woman she wanted her son to emulate. Yet she had been reduced to racial stereotypes by ignorant passengers and incompetent airline staff. "Mama, why did they move the nice lady?" Marcus asked innocently. Angela struggled to explain institutional racism to her 8-year-old son. "Sometimes people make mistakes based on how others look instead of who they really are," she said carefully. "That's not fair," Marcus replied with the moral clarity of childhood. "No, baby, it's not fair at all." 3 rows ahead, businessman Tom Rodriguez pulled out his phone to text his wife. He had recognized Samantha from a consulting project his company had considered hiring Meridian Industries to handle. The proposal had been impressive, and now he was witnessing the CEO being treated like a second-class citizen. Flight attendant Jessica Chen began overhearing fragments of passenger conversations during her drink service. References to Fortune 500, CEO, and Harvard created a growing pit in her stomach. She discreetly searched for Samantha Williams on her phone during a break in service. The search results hit her like a physical blow. Samantha Williams, founder and CEO of Meridian Industries, featured speaker at the World Economic Forum, author of the best-selling business book, Breaking Barriers, listed among Fortune's most powerful women in business. Jessica's hands trembled as she read article after article about the woman she had helped humiliate. This wasn't just a customer service failure, it was a career-ending catastrophe. She had participated in the discrimination of one of the most prominent businesswomen in America. She immediately tried to find Supervisor Patricia Wells, but Wells was in the galley reviewing passenger manifests, still oblivious to the developing crisis. In first class, Blackstone continued his victory lap, entertaining fellow passengers with exaggerated stories about his business dealings. He had claimed Samantha's seat like a trophy, spreading his belongings across the extra space and ordering premium wine to celebrate his successful complaint. "I knew something was off about her," he told the passenger beside him. "You develop an instinct for these things when you've been successful as long as I have." What he didn't notice was the changing atmosphere in economy class. Passengers who had witnessed his discriminatory behavior were now learning exactly who his victim was. Their discomfort was turning to active disgust. Dr. Patricia Williams, a physician traveling to a medical conference, recognized Samantha from a healthcare symposium where she had spoken about improving hospital operations. She remembered being impressed by Samantha's insights and wondering how someone so young had achieved such expertise. Now she understood. Samantha had built her consulting empire by understanding organizations from the ground up, including their failures and prejudices. Today's experience would give her intimate knowledge of Pinnacle Airlines' shortcomings. The irony was perfect and devastating. Young Marcus continued stealing glances at Samantha throughout the flight. She had become his hero the moment she spoke to him with such kindness and respect. When he grew up, he wanted to be just like her, successful, dignified, and unafraid. Angela noticed her son's fascination and felt a surge of maternal pride. Despite the humiliation, Samantha was handling herself with grace that commanded respect. She was teaching Marcus by example that true strength came from maintaining dignity in the face of injustice. Word about Samantha's identity eventually reached the economy flight attendants, who began sharing the information in hushed, horrified tones. They all knew that customer complaints about discrimination were taken seriously by corporate headquarters, especially when they involved prominent, public figures. But none of them knew the ultimate truth, that Samantha would soon own the entire airline. As the plane flew over Indiana farmland, the cabin had divided into two distinct camps. Economy class buzzed with indignation and support for Samantha. First class remained blissfully unaware that they had just created the biggest public relations nightmare in Pinnacle Airlines history. The revelation was coming, and it would change everything. Captain Robert Thompson's voice crackled over the intercom as Flight 447 began its descent into Chicago. At 58, Thompson had flown for Pinnacle Airlines for 23 years and prided himself on treating all passengers with respect. He had no idea about the drama unfolding in his cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into O'Hare International Airport. Weather is clear with a temperature of 72 degrees. Before we land, I have a special announcement to make. The cabin fell silent. Passengers looked up from their phones and magazines, curious about the unusual mid-flight announcement. Today we have the honor of flying with a very distinguished passenger. Ms. Samantha Williams, founder and CEO of Meridian Industries, is aboard our aircraft. What makes this particularly special is that Ms. Williams has just completed the acquisition of Pinnacle Airlines. She is now our new owner. The words hit the cabin like an electromagnetic pulse. Every conversation stopped. Every passenger froze. The silence was so complete that the engine noise seemed deafening by comparison. In first class, Richard Blackstone's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. His face drained of color as the captain's words penetrated his consciousness. The woman he had humiliated, the woman whose seat he was now occupying, was the new owner of the entire airline. I want to extend our deepest gratitude to Ms. Williams for choosing Pinnacle Airlines for her flight today, and we look forward to working under her leadership. Thank you for flying with us. The captain's announcement ended, but the cabin remained frozen in stunned silence. Then, slowly, economy class erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. Passengers who had witnessed Samantha's humiliation now understood the cosmic justice of the moment. "That's her," Marcus shouted to anyone who would listen. "That's the nice lady. She owns the airplane." Angela wiped tears from her eyes as she joined the standing ovation. Around them, economy passengers clapped, whistled, and shouted their support for the woman who had been treated so poorly just hours earlier. In first class, the reaction was dramatically different. Patricia Wells stood frozen in the galley, her face ashen as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She had just discriminated against the woman who now controlled her career, her future, her very livelihood. Jessica Chen felt nauseous as the implications hit her. She had participated in the humiliation of her new boss, the person who would determine whether she kept her job or faced termination and industry blacklisting. But nowhere was the shock more profound than in seat 2A, where Blackstone sat amid the wreckage of his shattered wine glass. His hands trembled as he tried to process what had just happened. The uppity woman he had displaced was now the most powerful person on the aircraft. Margaret Stevens turned to her husband with horror in her eyes. "We supported him," she whispered. "We agreed with his complaint. Oh God, what have we done?" The visual contrast was striking and symbolic. Economy class celebrated with joy and vindication, while first class sat in mortified silence, contemplating the consequences of their prejudice and complicity. Samantha remained seated quietly, accepting congratulations from surrounding passengers, with gracious nods and smiles. She felt no satisfaction in their panic, only determination to use this moment constructively. Young Marcus broke free from his mother's restraint and approached Samantha's seat. "Are you really the boss of the airplane now?" he asked with wide-eyed wonder. "I am," Samantha confirmed, kneeling to his eye level. "And you know what that means?" "What?" "It means that everyone on this airplane, no matter what they look like or where they come from, will be treated with respect and dignity. That's my promise to you." The boy beamed with pride, and his declaration carried throughout the cabin. "She's going to make sure everyone is treated nice." Comment number 1 if you think Blackstone got exactly what he deserved. Smash that like button if you believe in karma and justice. And don't forget to subscribe because this story is about to reach its most satisfying conclusion. What do you think Samantha should do with her newfound power? Should she fire everyone involved, or show mercy and focus on systemic change? Let me know in the comments and prepare yourself for the most powerful transformation you've ever witnessed. The cabin transformation was immediate and complete. Samantha rose from her cramped economy seat with the quiet dignity of someone who had never doubted this moment would come. Every eye in the aircraft followed her movement as she walked toward first class, no longer as a humiliated passenger, but as the owner of the entire airline. Richard Blackstone scrambled to gather his belongings from seat 2A, his expensive suit wrinkled with nervous sweat. His hands shook as he tried to pack his briefcase, dropping papers that scattered across the floor. The same seat he had claimed with such arrogance now felt like enemy territory. "Please, keep the seat," Samantha said calmly as she approached. "I think we're both exactly where we belong now." Her words carried no malice, but their impact was devastating. Blackstone understood that his comfortable world of privilege and assumptions had just collapsed around him. The woman he had dismissed as unworthy now held his professional future in her hands. Patricia Wells appeared from the galley, her supervisor's uniform wrinkled and her face pale with panic. She approached Samantha with the desperate energy of someone trying to prevent a career catastrophe. "Ms. Williams, I want to sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding earlier," Wells began, her voice cracking with stress. "There seems to have been a communication error, and I take full responsibility for any inconvenience you experienced." Samantha studied Wells with the analytical eye that had made her a successful CEO. She saw desperation, fear, and a complete lack of genuine remorse. This was damage control, not accountability. "A misunderstanding?" Samantha repeated calmly. "Is that what you call removing a paying first-class passenger based on the racist complaints of other passengers?" The word racist hung in the air like an indictment. Wells stammered, trying to find words that would minimize her liability while avoiding admission of wrongdoing. "I was simply trying to ensure all passengers were comfortable," Wells said, weakly. "All passengers?" Samantha asked. "Or just the white passengers who felt I didn't belong in first class?" The question was rhetorical, and everyone in the cabin knew it. Wells had prioritized the comfort of racist passengers over the rights of a legitimate ticket holder. Her motivations were transparent and indefensible. Jessica Chen approached with tears streaming down her face. Unlike her supervisor, Jessica understood the moral weight of what had happened. She had been complicit in discrimination, and no amount of corporate training could excuse her actions. "Ms. Williams, I am deeply sorry," Jessica said, her voice breaking. "I know my apology can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I recognize how wrong this was. I failed in my duty to treat all passengers equally, and I take full responsibility for my part in your mistreatment." Samantha studied the young flight attendant's face, seeing genuine remorse rather than calculated damage control. This was someone who had made a terrible mistake under pressure, but possessed the moral courage to acknowledge it fully. "Thank you for your honesty, Jessica," Samantha replied. "Accountability is the first step toward change." The contrast between the two employees was stark. Wells focused on self-preservation, while Jessica focused on moral responsibility. Samantha made mental notes about who could be salvaged and who needed to be removed. As news of the revelation spread through social media, passengers began recording videos of the aftermath. Phones captured Blackstone's humiliation, Wells's desperate apologies, and Samantha's gracious responses. The story was going viral in real time. Tom Rodriguez, the businessman who had recognized Samantha earlier, stood and began applauding. His action triggered a wave of support throughout the cabin as passengers realized they were witnessing corporate history. "This is exactly the kind of leadership American business needs," Rodriguez announced loudly. "Someone who understands dignity and justice from personal experience." The applause grew stronger, fed by a mixture of admiration for Samantha and shame about their earlier silence during her humiliation. Passengers who had said nothing when she was being discriminated against now competed to show their support. But Samantha wasn't interested in their belated approval. She was focused on the systemic changes needed to prevent future discrimination. This incident would become a case study in corporate transformation, but only if she handled it correctly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samantha said, her voice carrying the authority of ownership. "What happened today was unacceptable, but it wasn't unique. Discrimination occurs on airlines every day, affecting passengers who don't have the platform I've been blessed with. That changes now." She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed her assistant. "Monica, initiate the comprehensive review of all Pinnacle Airlines policies regarding passenger treatment. I want a full audit of discrimination complaints over the past 5 years, and I want recommendations for systemic changes on my desk by tomorrow morning." The cabin listened in amazement as their new owner transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for industry-wide reform. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Margaret Stevens approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence replaced by shame. "Ms. Williams, my husband and I owe you an apology. We were wrong to support Mr. Blackstone's complaint, and we're ashamed of our behavior." Samantha nodded acknowledgement, but didn't offer immediate forgiveness. Accountability required more than words. It required changed behavior over time. As the plane touched down at O'Hare, the power dynamics had completely reversed. The woman who had been forced into economy class now controlled the fate of everyone who had participated in her humiliation. Justice had arrived exactly on schedule. The media circus waiting at O'Hare International Airport exceeded all expectations. Word of the discrimination incident had leaked through social media, and news outlets from across the country descended on Chicago to cover the story. Samantha Williams, emerging from the same aircraft that had humiliated her, made for irresistible television. "Ms. Williams," reporters shouted as she deplaned, "how does it feel to own the airline that discriminated against you?" Samantha paused at the top of the jet bridge, surveying the crowd of cameras and microphones. This was her moment to control the narrative and set the tone for transformational change. "Today I experienced something that happens to minority passengers every day," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the terminal. "The difference is that I have the platform and resources to do something about it. Pinnacle Airlines will become a model for equality and dignity in travel." The press conference that followed made international headlines. Samantha announced the immediate implementation of comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all Pinnacle employees, zero-tolerance policies for racist behavior, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to investigate passenger complaints. Patricia Wells received her termination notice before the aircraft finished deplaning. Her personnel file, containing 3 previous discrimination complaints that had been buried by airline management, became evidence in a federal investigation. Wells found herself unemployable in the airline industry as news of her role spread. Throughout aviation circles, the consequences were swift and severe. Her mortgage payment became impossible without her supervisor's salary. Her professional reputation disappeared overnight. Within 6 months, she was working minimum wage at a retail store, a victim of her own prejudice and poor judgment. Jessica Chen faced a different fate. Samantha recognized her genuine remorse and potential for growth, offering her a choice: termination with severance or enrollment in intensive sensitivity training followed by a promotion to head of customer relations. Jessica chose redemption, becoming one of Pinnacle's most effective advocates for passenger rights. Richard Blackstone's professional downfall was spectacular and public. Video of his discriminatory behavior went viral, generating millions of views and widespread condemnation. His investment clients, particularly those committed to diversity and inclusion, began withdrawing their portfolios within hours of the story breaking. Blackstone and Associates lost 60% of its client base within a week. The firm's reputation for discreet wealth management evaporated as Blackstone became the face of entitled racism in corporate America. His father's legacy crumbled under the weight of his son's prejudice. Personal consequences followed professional ones. Blackstone's country club revoked his membership after member complaints. His social circle abandoned him as association with his name became toxic. Dating became impossible as background searches revealed his role in the airplane incident. 6 months later, Blackstone filed for personal bankruptcy as legal fees from discrimination lawsuits consumed his remaining assets. The same sense of entitlement that had led him to demand Samantha's removal now left him isolated and unemployable. Meanwhile, Samantha's leadership transformed Pinnacle Airlines into an industry leader in equality and customer service. The Dignity and Travel initiative she launched became a model studied by transportation companies worldwide. Employee training programs addressed unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution. Customer service representatives learned to recognize and counter discriminatory complaints. Flight attendants received education about implicit bias and its impact on passenger treatment. The results were measurable and impressive. Customer satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Discrimination complaints dropped 90%. Employee morale improved as staff felt empowered to do the right thing rather than simply appease complaining passengers. Pinnacle's stock price rose 40% in the 6 months following Samantha's acquisition, driven by improved service ratings and positive media coverage. Investors recognized that diversity and inclusion weren't just moral imperatives, they were profitable business strategies. Young Marcus visited Samantha's corporate headquarters 3 months after the flight, invited as part of an educational program for underprivileged students. He walked through the executive offices with wide-eyed wonder, seeing possibility everywhere. He looked. "I'm going to have an office like this someday," he told Samantha confidently. "I believe you will," she replied, meaning every word. "And when you do, remember to use your success to help others climb the same ladder you did." The scholarship fund Samantha established in her mother's name provided educational opportunities for hundreds of minority students annually. Diana Williams. Scholarships became prestigious awards that opened doors to prestigious universities and promising careers. Industry-wide changes rippled outward from Pinnacle's transformation. Other airlines implemented similar anti-discrimination policies to avoid becoming the next viral scandal. The Federal Aviation Administration updated regulations regarding passenger treatment and discrimination complaints. Senator Elizabeth Warren invited Samantha to testify before Congress about discrimination in transportation. Her testimony led to the Passenger Dignity Act, federal legislation requiring standardized anti-bias training for all transportation industry employees. The young flight attendant who had replaced Jessica's former position sent Samantha a thank you note. "Because of the changes you implemented, I've never had to choose between appeasing racist passengers and doing what's right. Thank you for making my job easier and more meaningful." 6 months after the incident, Samantha reflected on how a moment of humiliation had become the catalyst for her greatest impact. The pain of discrimination had transformed into the power to prevent others from experiencing similar treatment. Her mother Diana's words echoed in her memory. "Turn your pain into power, baby girl." She had done exactly that, creating systemic change that would outlast her own career and protect countless future passengers from discrimination. 1 year after the infamous Flight 447, Samantha Williams stood before the International Air Transport Association, receiving the Humanitarian Leadership Award for her transformation of airline industry practices. The same organization that had once ignored discrimination complaints now celebrated her for making equality a business priority. Pinnacle Airlines had achieved something unprecedented, becoming the most inclusive major airline in America, while also posting record profits. The correlation wasn't coincidental. Companies that treated all customers with dignity and respect earned loyalty that translated directly to revenue. The Dignity and Travel certification program Samantha developed was now implemented by 47 airlines across 6 continents. Flight attendants worldwide learned to recognize and counter discriminatory passenger behavior. Supervisors received training on making decisions based on policy rather than prejudice. Customer service metrics told the story of transformation. Passenger satisfaction scores reached 94%, the highest in Pinnacle's history. Repeat bookings increased 28%, as travelers sought airlines that guaranteed respectful treatment regardless of race, religion, or economic status. Employee satisfaction soared, as staff felt empowered to uphold company values rather than simply appeasing loud complainers. Flight attendants reported feeling proud of their work environment and supported by management when making difficult decisions. Richard Blackstone's fate served as a cautionary tale throughout corporate America. His complete professional and social downfall demonstrated the real consequences of entitled racism in an interconnected world. Business schools used his case study to teach about reputation management and the costs of discrimination. His former investment firm struggled to rebuild its reputation under new management, but the Blackstone name remained toxic in financial circles. The family's century-long legacy in wealth management had been destroyed by one man's prejudice and entitlement. Patricia Wells never recovered from her termination and industry blacklisting. Her career in aviation ended permanently, and she struggled to find employment in any customer service role. Her story became required reading in airline management training programs as an example of how individual bias could destroy professional prospects. Jessica Chen, by contrast, thrived under Samantha's mentorship. Her promotion to head of customer relations led to additional responsibilities and recognition throughout the industry. She spoke at conferences about redemption, accountability, and the importance of learning from mistakes. "Ms. Williams could have ended my career," Jessica often told audiences. "Instead, she gave me the opportunity to become better." That's the difference between punishment and transformation. Young Marcus, now 9 years old, remained in regular contact with Samantha through the mentorship program she established. His academic performance excelled as he worked toward his goal of building his own business empire. The confidence instilled during their airplane conversation continued shaping his ambitions. His mother, Angela, often shared their story at community events, emphasizing how one person's success could inspire an entire generation. When children see people who look like them in positions of power, they understand that those positions are possible for them too. The Diana Williams Scholarship Fund had awarded grants to over 300 students, many of whom were now attending prestigious universities and launching promising careers. Each recipient received not just financial support but mentorship and networking opportunities that multiplied their chances of success. Samantha's autobiography, From Humiliation to Transformation, Building Bridges in Business, became a bestseller and required reading in business schools nationwide. The book detailed her journey from childhood poverty to corporate leadership while addressing systemic barriers faced by minorities in professional settings. The legal settlements from discrimination lawsuits against Pinnacle's former management practices funded additional diversity initiatives across the transportation industry. Every dollar paid in damages became investment in preventing future discrimination. Congressional testimony led to the Passenger Dignity Act becoming federal law, requiring anti-bias training for all transportation workers and establishing federal oversight of discrimination complaints. The legislation bore Samantha's influence throughout its provisions. International recognition followed domestic success. The United Nations invited Samantha to lead a global initiative addressing discrimination in transportation and hospitality industries. Her model spread to countries struggling with their own bias and prejudice challenges. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Marcus Johnson, the security officer who had reluctantly escorted her from first class, requested a meeting to deliver a personal apology. "I've thought about that day every single day since it happened," he told her. "I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to stand up. Watching what you've accomplished has inspired me to be better." Marcus had enrolled in business school, using tuition assistance from Pinnacle's employee education program. He planned to pursue a career in human resources, specializing in workplace equality and justice. Samantha's response embodied the grace that had defined her throughout the ordeal. "We all face moments when we must choose between what's easy and what's right. The important thing is learning from those moments and growing stronger." As she concluded her acceptance speech at the Humanitarian Award ceremony, Samantha reflected on the journey from economy seat 23F to international recognition. The humiliation that could have broken her spirit had instead become the foundation for transformational change. Discrimination thrives in silence and isolation, she told the audience. But when we turn our personal pain into purposeful action, we create change that extends far beyond our individual experiences. Every person who travels with dignity because of policy changes we implemented represents a victory over prejudice. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of her achievements, but acknowledgement of the ongoing work required to create truly equal societies. Samantha understood that lasting change required sustained effort, not just individual success stories. 6 months later, she boarded another Pinnacle Airlines flight, this time greeted by name by flight attendants who understood their responsibility to treat every passenger with respect. The airplane that had once been a site of humiliation had become a symbol of transformation. Young Marcus sent her a drawing he had made, a picture of himself in a business suit standing next to an airplane with Marcus's airline written on the side. Below the picture, he had written, "Thank you for showing me that dreams can come true even when people try to stop them." Samantha framed the drawing and hung it in her office as a daily reminder that individual success meant nothing without the responsibility to lift others. The little boy who had witnessed her humiliation now saw himself as capable of achieving similar heights. The pain of discrimination had indeed become the power of transformation, exactly as her mother had promised decades earlier in their Detroit apartment. But more importantly, that transformation had created opportunities for countless others to rise above their own challenges and barriers. What started as one woman's fight for dignity on an airplane had become a movement for equality throughout an entire industry. And that movement continued growing. One policy change, one trained employee, one inspired child at a time. Samantha Williams's extraordinary journey teaches us that adversity can become our greatest catalyst for positive change. Her experience demonstrates that maintaining dignity under pressure creates more powerful outcomes than reacting with anger or defeat. The story reveals how individual success carries the responsibility to uplift others and create systemic transformation. Most importantly, we learn that discrimination reveals more about the perpetrator than the victim. Blackstone's prejudice destroyed his own legacy, while Samantha's grace elevated her platform for meaningful change. True power lies not in avoiding challenges, but in transforming them into opportunities for justice. The airline industry's transformation proves that inclusive policies benefit everyone. When companies prioritize dignity and respect, they create environments where excellence thrives. Samantha's mother's wisdom rings eternal. Turn your pain into power. This story shows us that our response to injustice defines our character and determines our impact. Every setback contains seeds of a greater comeback when we refuse to let others define our worth or limit our potential. What moment in your life could you transform from pain into power like Samantha did? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Share your thoughts in the comments below about how we can create more inclusive spaces in our daily lives. If this story moved you to believe that justice always finds a way, smash that like button to spread this message of hope and transformation. Subscribe for more inspiring stories that prove dignity and perseverance can overcome any obstacle. And don't forget to share this powerful tale with someone who needs to remember their own strength and worth. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey from humiliation to triumph. Your support helps these important stories reach people who need to hear them most. May you always remember that your worth cannot be diminished by others' prejudice, and may you find the courage to turn every challenge into an opportunity for positive change. Keep believing in the power of justice, dignity, and the unbreakable human spirit.